3,000 people a year will die from a foodborne illness that didn't have to if the product was handled or labeled safely. There's a new law called FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, passed by President Obama, and it says all food facilities, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's manufacturing, has to have a food safety plan.
In 1906, Upton Sinclair and other muckrakers took a stand and exposed meatpacking companies. Mainly, these meatpacking companies were located in Chicago. Upton Sinclair exposed these meatpacking companies because of their factory conditions and how unsanitary the meat was packed and processed. Labor unions boycotted and complained about the working conditions and how they felt like they were wage slaves. This topic took a stand in history in many ways, either through specific people or an act like the Pure Foods and Drugs Act of 1906, as well as the Meatpacking Act of 1906. Upton Sinclair took a stand by exposing the meatpacking companies through a book called The Jungle, which then influenced the House of Representatives, Congress, and President Theodore Roosevelt to pass the Pure Foods and Drugs Act of 1906.
Can I ask you your name?
Yes, sir. My name's Donnie Spurlaw.
And what do you do?
I'm a public health inspector for the state of Florida for FDA, Food and Drug Administration.
Okay. So, can I ask you a few questions?
Sure, go ahead.
What is it like to be a health inspector?
I get that question a lot. It's a satisfying job. It's gratifying. It's serious because on the one hand, you are wanting to help businesses succeed, and on the other hand, you have to help the public. You have to make sure the public's safe.
After Upton Sinclair wrote his book, The Jungle, there was a lot of public outrage on how the people in the factories were treated, also how the factory workers worked in bad conditions and sometimes even severed fingers or cut off whole fingers. Instead of the workers telling someone or getting medical help, the workers would continue working and blend the finger right in with the meat. The people were also outraged that the food they were eating was unhealthy and poisonous. Upton Sinclair exposed that they were adding poisonous preservatives to the food. Upton Sinclair also describes in his book that dead rats were shoveled into sausage grinding machines and how bribed inspectors looked the other way when deceased cows were slaughtered for beef and filth and guts were simply swept off the floor and packaged up as potted ham. These are all the genuine reasons the public was outraged after reading Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. You see, there was a sort of a FDA, but it was not enforced in any means.
What is the worst thing you have ever seen in the inspection world?
Well, I've seen a kid because a firm, a business, didn't take their food safety seriously. The product they were producing wasn't taken seriously. They didn't take the safety hazards seriously, and I saw a kid in the hospital for a week on life support.
Labor unions took a stand against the unsanitary environment in the meatpacking factories. The factories were covered with rats and other germs roaming around the meat. The diseases in the factories made many employees ill or possibly die. The conditions in the factories made cutting or chopping meat risky for the employees. Political cartoons were made on the meatpacking factories, dealing with the disgusting conditions in the factories. A secret group of people called Knights of Labor worked together to stop unequal pay and way too many employment hours. Knights of Labor was making a big change in the working world for employees. Laws were made where children didn't have to work in factories where they could risk injuring themselves. Employees' hours were really long, so they were cut back so they would have time to rest. Upton Sinclair traveled from his hometown Baltimore to Chicago to do his journalist work. Upton Sinclair was born in Baltimore and died in New Jersey. At just age 14, Upton Sinclair attended the City College of New York and started selling children's stories and humor pieces to magazines. Upton Sinclair graduated in 1897. He enrolled at Columbia University to continue his studies. He wrote dime novels to support himself. Upton Sinclair organized the EPIC, End Poverty in California, which was the base of his run for Democratic governor of California in 1934. In the 1900s, Upton Sinclair married a woman named Maida Fuller. They then went on to have a son named David. In the early 1920s, Sinclair had divorced Maida, remarried a woman named Mary Kimberth. Sinclair's wife Mary died of a stroke in 1961. 2 years later, he went on to marry his third wife, Mary Willis. Journalists all over the U.S. were exposing things just like Upton Sinclair during the Progressive era. Many people may find it strange that Upton Sinclair was a vegetarian. Sinclair's intention on writing The Jungle were not to try to get rid of meat. His diet didn't last long. In fact, it ended in 1911. Upton Sinclair taught himself to read when he was only 5. Sinclair was a very self-reliant kid with many interests. Upton Sinclair graduated Columbus University in 1897, but didn't come out with his law degree as he was planning on.
How long have you been a health inspector?
I've been doing this for about 20 years. 20 years.
How have inspections changed over time?
Well, back in the older days, probably 15 years ago, even as long as 8, 9, I'd say 7 years ago, inspections used to be, like you see in here, it used to be floors, walls, and ceilings. Now everything's went to risk-based inspection, and risk-based is like, what's the risk? So what they want you to do now is we look at the process and the procedures and the packaging to see what kind of biological, chemical, or physical hazards may be in the food or associated with the food.
In 1902, Harvey Washington Wiley organized a volunteer group of healthy young men called the Poison Squad, who tested the effects of chemicals and adulterated foods on themselves. The Poison Squad took a stand against meatpacking by being a test subject for scientists. In 1906, it was hard for scientists to fault poisonous foods because they had no proof. The Poison Squad was made up of 12 test dummies and the chef. The chef was known as Perry. Perry would cook up high-class dishes with poison in them. Before the members of the Poison Squad would eat their dishes, scientists would weigh them, check their temperature, and check their pulse rates. They would also collect their urine, sweat, and hair and submit it to their weekly physical where scientists would check up on them. The Meat Inspection Act of 1906 took a stand against meatpacking. A way they took a stand was factory inspections. In these factory inspections, the FDA and the USDA would go in and try to find any misbranded or poisons in the food. Mainly, they would find these poisons in the food dyes or preservatives. One product that was misbranded a lot was ketchup. They would make it out of fermented tomato cores and skins, vinegar for flavor, and dyes to make it red. Theodore Roosevelt called inspections on meatpacking factories because Upton Sinclair notified him about the corrupt meat industry through a letter. After the inspections, many changes were made. Employees had better working conditions and hours were cut back so employees weren't trapped in the factories working all day and night. The meat had to be inspected before being sold to people from then on. Employees were treated better after the act. The government made sure the meat was sanitary to eat and factories were checked often after 1906.
What did the standards used to be like, and how have they evolved over time?
Now what's happening now is you used to could just all the retail places that retail food, which means you go in there and you buy the food. You know, you just go in and walk up to the counter and buy it. That's called retail, and that's what they call the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, Retail Food Code. And everybody in the world operates off of Retail Food Code. And if you're manufacturing, such as a place, I'm in a honey factory today. So in a place like manufacturing, they operate off what they call CFRs, Code of Federal Regulation. And so it used to be people would walk in, like I said, and they look at the floors, walls, and ceilings. Well, now what's coming in the future is HACCP. And HACCP is HACCP, and HACCP is Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. HACCP is what the future is going to.
This project made a difference by changing the lives of every single U.S. citizen. It made it to where you can look at your food without hoping some poison is contained inside. It made it to where you can look at the label of your food and know what you see is what you're actually getting. All of this was possible because Upton Sinclair wrote a book, The Jungle, exposing the unsanitary working conditions, meatpacking, and processing conditions.